Breaking news. Thank you all for joining me live. The weeks-long trial of 5 members of the Oath Keepers in connection with January 6th has just reached its conclusion. The jury has reached a verdict in regards to this seditious conspiracy trial. The government trying to prove that these 5 people were trying to conspire to overthrow the United States government. The results are a mix of guilty and not guilty charges. My friend, independent journalist Steve Baker, is on the ground there in D.C. He's about to join me live momentarily. He has been in that courtroom every single day of this trial. He has all the details on what just went down. So before we jump right to him, shout out to the sponsor of my coverage. If the rising cost of food, housing, and gas wasn't enough, now your dollars won't go far with utility bills either. Energy bills are expected to surge an average of 20% by next month, and will jump by a further 30% in 2023 and 2024. That's why I highly recommend this amazing power-saving device. This device provides your home with a smooth, stable electrical current that helps lead to dramatically lower energy bills. It has been featured on Fox News, Forbes, Popular Electronics, Discover, and Wired. StopWatt lowers your energy bills by stabilizing power, reducing dirty electricity, and eliminating harmful spikes. You'll also get a $100 utility rebate certificate if you get yours now. Try, inspect, and judge it with your own eyes and hands, risk-free for yourself for 60 days. Plus, if you act now, you can get up to an additional 50% off just by going to the link down in my description, www.savepowerbills.com. That is savepowerbills.com, and you can thank me later. All right, with that being said, let's bring out Steve Baker. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, Ivory. I'm good. It's been a long day.
You're outside the federal courthouse right now in D.C.
Yes, I am. Got the camera scrum behind me, and there's a bunch of the attorneys around on this side doing individual interviews with various press people at this moment. And it's been a long 8+ weeks.
Wow.
It's actually been 10 weeks if you count jury selection. And of course, I've been here over 8 now, and it's all over today.
Okay, so let's go through the verdict the jury reached, starting with the ringleader of the Oath Keepers, Stewart Rhodes. I'm going to show his picture here. That is Stewart Rhodes.
Yeah.
And what did the jury say about him?
Well, they came out and hit him with the big one. He was found guilty of seditious conspiracy, which, of course, was the big thing that the Department of Justice wanted, but they did not find all of the defendants guilty of that charge. Some of them were found not guilty of seditious conspiracy. And as you mentioned earlier, it's quite a mixed bag of guilty versus not guilty. I didn't actually think that the jury would come back today when we got to the end of the day with only 30 minutes left. And then suddenly we got the announcement in the press room that they were coming back. It was a shock. I thought we were going to be here again tomorrow morning, but they came back and they read through these charges very, very quickly. It was tough to get them all down and accurate. Fortunately, I had prepared my list in advance just in case they did come back today.
Wow.
But it's confusing, and it's going to take some analysis. And I'll probably be doing a lot of that tonight later on when I get back to my Airbnb here in DC. Because some of the guilty, not guilty doesn't make sense when you have, for instance, Stewart Rhodes found guilty of seditious conspiracy, but not guilty on the other 2 conspiracy charges. Whereas,
I'm looking at your notes here. Count 1, seditious conspiracy, guilty for Stewart Rhodes. Count number 2 for Stewart, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. He was found not guilty. Obstruction of an official proceeding and aiding and abetting, guilty, but then conspiracy to prevent an officer from discharging any duties, not guilty. And then number 7, tampering with documents or proceedings and aiding and abetting, he is guilty.
Yes. And then you get down to the other charges or the other defendants, and they were found guilty of a couple of the other conspiracy charges, which doesn't make any sense to me on the face of it, because that goes back to what I think you and I talked about last week, is that the government switched gears about 3/4 away from through this trial, away from an explicit conspiracy to an implicit conspiracy. So they seem to have convinced the jury that on some of these lesser conspiracy charges, that just because they were there at the top of the steps when those doors opened, that they had, without any orders from Stuart Rhodes or any of the other Oath Keeper leaders, that they then conspired together through telepathy, I would assume, because they never discussed it, to commit a conspiracy on those other charges. So it's going to take me a little while to sit down and go through these and parse them all out. And then, of course, I'll have the opportunity to speak with some of the attorneys later as well and get more clarification on why they thought that this happened this way and why some of these conspiracy charges are that some of the defendants were found guilty on some of the lesser conspiracy charges, whereas Stuart Rhodes was not. And part of that was that Stuart Rhodes didn't actually enter the building. So how he can be the leader and not be found guilty of those charges, but the underlings in the organization were guilty of those conspiracies is a bit confusing.
Wow. Yeah, because I mean, we previously spoke about the FBI seizing everyone's text messages, pouring through every message that people sent, and it's clear that these other people, they were not conspiring to overthrow the government.
Yeah.
But you're saying the jury is saying that they found solid proof that Stuart Rhodes was conspiring to overthrow our government?
That's apparently what they have found in the seditious conspiracy charge. But that charge, which is also confusing because it requires force. In order for the jury to have found him guilty of seditious conspiracy, it not only implies that there was a plan with other individuals to do so, but that also required force. And Stuart Rhodes engaged in no violence or force that day. He didn't go inside the Capitol. He didn't breach any barricade lines or any doors or any windows, but somehow they determined that he's guilty of that charge.
Wow. Okay, before we get into the other four defendants, I want to see the scene there. Show me which media are out there, because you're right outside the federal courthouse. The media, and I think the lawyers are out there too, right?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see behind me or not, but there are some lawyers still doing individual interviews with various press persons from mainstream media. And then, of course, right here, directly behind me is where they did the actual press conference following it, where these cameras are set up and the lights, as you can see the lights there. But that's over. There's still a couple of the attorneys have not come out yet, but I see some of them are getting into their cars, and their taxis are here, or their Ubers or whatever are picking them up right now, and they're loading up and headed out. So it's all said and done.
Incredible. Okay, this is, I think, WUSA's graphic. These
Mm-hmm.
are the four defendants. So we talked about Stuart Rhodes with the eye patch. He's the head honcho. Number two was Kelly Megs. What did Kelly Megs get convicted of today?
Well, I think he took the biggest hit, and actually the most unwarranted hit. He did not personally testify. He was one of the really quiet ones in this trial, but he was the leader of the Florida state chapter of the Oath Keepers, and they determined that he was guilty. You have the list there in front of you. I don't have it right here in front of you, but I believe that he was found guilty on all of the charges he was facing except for one.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm looking. So Kelly Megs, he's guilty of seditious conspiracy, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an official proceeding, and aiding and abetting, conspiracy to prevent an officer from discharging duties. He was also guilty of tampering with documents or proceedings and aiding and abetting, but he was not guilty of destruction of government property and aiding and abetting.
Yeah. So it is an interesting mix, as I said, and I think that he probably, once I am able to sit down and parse this all out, he took the biggest hit of everybody, and I think unfairly so. He was certainly not the ringleader by any means, and he's actually a pretty good guy, you know.
Really?
Wrong place, wrong time, and had he not walked inside that building, I don't think he'd be facing any of these charges.
Yeah, but conspiring to overthrow the U.S. government, I mean, that's pretty serious. What sort of evidence do you think persuaded the jury?
I'm not exactly sure what they were thinking in terms of Kelly Meggs, but um, this is one, particularly the one guy that I think is the most confusing for me, having watched this entire trial, that he took the biggest hit of all.
Wow. And then number 3 was Ken Harrelson. This is Ken with his wife, Angel. I know this is the one that you've really focused on closely. Tell me about the results for him.
Well, I certainly was very gratified because I have been following his case for over a year now, even before he was added to the seditious conspiracy charge. And he, by far, and I think that the jury found this to be true, is he was by far the least involved. He certainly was involved in none of the planning. He wasn't even added to the January 6th operation until the evening of January 3rd, and that was specifically to come up and participate in the personal security details. But for some reason, and inexplicably, which I do not understand, they found him guilty of one of the conspiracy charges, not the seditious conspiracy charge. But that goes back to what I said earlier, because he was standing at the top of those steps when that door opened, and he walked through that open door and was inside the Capitol for only 17 minutes. They somehow concluded that he was guilty of that one conspiracy charge.
Wow. And then these last 2 people, Jessica Watkins
Mm-hmm.
and Thomas Caldwell.
Yeah. I actually expected Thomas to get hit a lot harder than he did, mainly because, as I've talked about before, this was a trial based on scary words, and Thomas Caldwell probably uttered the scariest words of anybody throughout the
Really?
lead up to January 6th, and on the day itself. But he also did not enter the Capitol. He was there with his wife that day. He's an elderly man. He's 69 years old. He is permanently and severely disabled from combat injuries, and he's the only one of the defendants who has not been held in pretrial detention. He has been held or allowed to be in home detention throughout that entire time leading up to the trial. And the judge today also is allowing him to continue to be outside of jail until sentencing takes place. So I would say that the fact that he got off lighter is a bit of a surprise, considering the overwhelming amount of scary words he uttered, but also that's probably more fair than what Kelly Meggs was hit with today.
I mean, scary words. I thought those were protected by the First Amendment.
Well, they used to be. I'm not so sure anymore.
Not for Stuart Rhodes, though. Perhaps,
No.
perhaps a little bit more for Thomas Caldwell and Jessica
Yeah.
Watkins. I mean, Jessica Watkins. It says that she is not guilty of seditious conspiracy, but she was guilty of conspiracy to construct an official or to obstruct an official proceeding.
Yes.
What was she seen doing?
Well, she actually is the one who testified on her own behalf, and she was a very, very sympathetic witness. As you probably remember, she is a trans woman, and she had a very difficult time in the military because of that. She actually went AWOL for a couple of months at the end of her service because she had been outed by one of her fellow Army mates.
Wow.
And as a result of that and her disappointment in her conclusion of her military time, she decided to start her own militia in Ohio. And then that militia, which has only ever had a total of 6 people in her little, what she called her OSRM, Ohio State Regular Militia, they ended up joining up with the Oath Keepers in 2020 for a few of their security operations that they did in Louisville, Kentucky, and then a couple of others here in DC, and then, of course, then on January 6th itself. So what ended up happening with her is that when she walked into the building, she did, in fact, get involved in a pushing scrum with police officers inside the building that led to, it was a hallway leading to the Senate chamber that these officers were protecting, and she got involved in that pushing match. She did not actually connect with or do violence against any officers, but she was right in the middle of that scrum. And she also said some scary words. And so
words like what?
That's where she said, well, she in the middle of that, she was saying, push, 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 they can't stop us. And so having that on tape was evidence enough. And she did actually, on the stand when she was offering her testimony under direct examination from her attorney, she admitted to it. She took full responsibility for it. She said it was stupid of me. And when her attorney, Jonathan Crisp, offered her closing argument, he actually asked the jury to find her guilty of that charge, but to find her not guilty on the others.
Wow. Wait, so you're saying, so she's a transgender. You're saying she used to be a man?
That's correct.
Okay, wow. Okay, so how long do you think these people will be in prison?
Well, that's going to be a very interesting thing, because we just saw in the last couple of days, Judge Maida has showed some mercy to another North Carolina January 6th defendant, who the government was asking for somewhere between 5 and 7 years on him, and Judge Maida let him off with only a year of house detention and 3 years of probation. So I don't know if that same mercy is going to be applied in such a political trial like this, but he does have the opportunity to do so. Now, the seditious conspiracy charge, which a couple of the guys were found guilty of, including Stuart Rhodes, that carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. But then you add to that the other guilty charges. These guys could get up to 30 years. And when you come down to the other end of the spectrum, and you're talking about Ken Harrelson, it'll be interesting, because Ken has been in jail now for almost 2 years, so he will certainly have a significant amount of time served. And I will be interested to see how harsh Judge Maida will come down on him for that one conspiracy charge, which he's been found guilty for.
Wow. Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait for that. Okay, I'm checking your comments. I got to respond to this one. You said a trans woman, MAGA person. That is so rare. It sounds sus. No, I think from what I'm seeing, there's a good number of trans people who lean right wing. Look at Bruce Caitlyn Jenner. And these trans people used to call into Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, all the time.
This is what I'm saying. That's right. You and I both watched or listened to Rush Limbaugh, right? I'm saying I have commented, and the conservative bashing of trans people, I think, led to a reduced red wave November 8th. So
Very well could have. Yeah.
I think so, because if you're getting bashed, you're not going to vote for that party after all. Okay, so Steve, last time I had you on, we discussed that video of police collabing with Oath Keepers on January 6th. They were helping each other out. Police asked Oath Keepers for help. So why should they now be going to prison after they helped police? Now, did the jury ever get to see that video or hear testimony from the people who witnessed this collaboration?
No, the jury was never allowed to see that video. It's doubtful that they had not seen that at some time prior to them, being selected to be on this jury, because it was international news, and it certainly was heavily played here in D.C. itself. But it was prevented from being entered into evidence, and I think that had an impact. It was what I call the most hypocritical decision by Judge Maida of this entire trial, because he allowed prejudicial video into the trial of scenes of violence and barricade breaches and doors and windows being busted open, that the Oath Keepers were not even at the Capitol yet. He allowed that to be presented by the government in their presentations, but they were not allowed to see, the jury was not allowed to see equal and opposite exculpatory type video where Oath Keepers actually assisted Capitol Police in rescue from the building.
Wow. Well, that's a shame. That probably swayed the jury. That's a crying shame. Before I let
I'm
you
sure
go,
you can hear the sirens.
Yeah, that's not related, is it?
No, but it's just DC on a normal day.
It looks pretty cold there. Before I let you go warm up, there are more Oath Keepers going on trial in the coming weeks, right? What's
Yeah.
next?
Well, there is another Oath Keepers trial. There's 4 or 5 others that have not already pled out. Some of these guys have already pled out and taken plea deals, obviously in hopes of lesser sentences than if found guilty before a jury. But they have begun their pretrial hearings now. And obviously both sides learned a lot from this trial. And it'll be really interesting to see how that one plays out, considering what the two sides have learned, because both sides made mistakes, I'm sure, and both sides know that they could have done better on certain instances, and now they have, both the defense and the prosecution have the benefit of analyzing, here 8 weeks worth of data and trial here to improve what's going forward in that trial. And then, of course, then there's the Proud Boys conspiracy trial as well coming up.
Oh Lord. Okay, the one that I'm really interested in is the Jeremy Brown trial. I know you and I spoke about this. Now, I did a jailhouse interview with Jeremy Brown. He is the Oath Keeper who was approached by the FBI before January 6th went down. In early December, FBI approaches him. FBI wants to collab with him. They want him to be a spy. He declines, but he recorded crazy audio of the FBI admitting to how they collab with Facebook and Twitter to spy on people. And the fact that the FBI wanted plants like him in with right-wing people. He then, after attending January 6th as private security, he is untouched. But when he releases the audio of the FBI, after that is when FBI goes after him. He's now rotting in jail. And it'll be really interesting to see how this trial plays out, because they keep stacking charges against him, Steve.
Right. Yeah. And he's got 2 trials coming up. He has the one in Florida, and then he's got his second trial here in D.C. as well.
Yeah. At first, I mean, they raid his home, and like all they could say is like, "Oh, you have unregistered weapons," basically. And then they say, "Hold on, no, we're finding more. It looks like you are in possession of classified documents," the same sort of thing they tried to pin against Trump. So I guess they're going to have to prove that he had classified documents in court, right?
Yeah, and there's the issue of him having had a couple of hand grenades in his RV when it came up to D.C. That's a whole nother can of worms right there.
When he interviewed with me, he said that those weapons were planted by
That's
the
correct.
FBI.
That's what he's claiming. Yeah,
that's what he's saying. So we'll find out in court. Who's able to prove what. I really wanted to go to this trial, but I don't know if I can afford it. And I know you're trying to go and you're trying to afford it. Guys, independent journalism is important. Someone independent needs to be in that courtroom seeing exactly what's going on. So go support Steve, support me too, but links down below, links to Steve Baker's blog. I think Steve is going to be more likely to swing this than me. Go to Steve's Locals, support his Locals page, donate to him to help him be able to travel and cover these things in person and show what's really going on. So check out Steve's links down in my description. Anything else you want to say before I let you go?
That's it. I just want to thank everybody that's been following my coverage here for the last 8 weeks. And I do hope to get down to Jeremy Brown's trial in Tampa. It starts next week. That, as you mentioned, finances are a thing. It was incredibly expensive and draining financially to be here in D.C. for 8 weeks. But we, people have stepped forward and helped offset some of those costs. And we certainly need that for you and I both to continue doing what we're doing.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve Baker, the pragmatic constitutionalist. Thanks for everything. Oops,
thanks, Ivory.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.